Very grateful to accomplish many things that I've accomplished at my age, and the sky's the limit. I mean, the great saying, all money is not good money. So, I'm building something here at Michigan State, a foundation, a brotherhood, a family, and I think that's more important than money. I think family and God is more important than materialistic things. So I'm pretty sure everyone can say this, but you can see his demeanor. He's very quiet. He's very to himself. But and that's very much like me. So I would say that's one of the things that stands out. We have that in common, and then it's his vision. He may not speak a lot. You may not see him speak a lot, but when you talk to him personal and one on one, and when he talks to the team, you see his vision, and you see that he's very much capable of doing. And you know. He's very family oriented, and the way he just goes about everything is something that I look up to because that's what men do. It gives me a little more stability. It gives me a little more comfortability at the line. It slows me down. Everyone's trying to play fast, but sometimes you got to slow down to get everything right, the details, the small stuff, and just going through freshman year. I feel like I was probably thrown in the fire a little bit, but it kind of helped me realize that being thrown in the fire is not always so bad. I piggyback on some of the stuff that I did last season. I look at certain clips, certain routes. Maybe some of the reps that I didn't win, and some of the reps that I could have won, and I look at that stuff and see what I could have done differently to maybe have changed the outcome of that play. So the way he just runs our program, he's a man of a great will. Um, he's again very family oriented. He'll probably have us practice for a few on Sunday, and then probably everyone goes to church or something. But the way he goes about it is something that I look up to. As like a father figure and as someone that's a great role model. And I think that's what a man is. And just seeing that kind of spoke to me a little bit inside, and it gave me an idea of where I wanted to be at that moment. I would say if I can give you a percent out of 100, I would say about 80% of the team. I mean, maybe even 90. It's some guys that we're still trying to pull into that area, and and not everybody's religious. So you can't force religion on anyone. So the guys who do believe though, we take it very serious. We have Bible study. Jordan Hall leads our Bible studies and stuff, and you know we just believe in putting that first because without that, there's a lot of things that we wouldn't have and we wouldn't be. His leadership has gotten a lot better. It's a lot more focus on the field, on off the field. He has a chip on his shoulder, and you can see him wear it every day. And he comes in there with the attitude to just grind and fight every day. And you can see that he's getting better and he's building the team one by one. A little bit of adversity from last year, I believe so. He felt like that he left a lot on the table, and he's fighting to pick all that stuff up. Necessarily, not so much. It's our second year as a program. We only had 1 year together. It's our second year. I know a lot of people are expecting a lot of new things from us, and I could say there's probably a little bit of pressure. We had a lot of players to do a lot of big things, so of course there's going to be some expectations, but I feel like that we got the room to grow still and still do a lot. Physically, I'm like 4.8% body fat, so it's a lot of lean there. So I got to take care of my body a lot more, hydrate a lot more. I got to grow up a little bit. As a freshman, you're not thinking about those things too much. You just think about learning the playbook, getting in the weight room and doing stuff like that. But, it's a lot more attention to details when it comes to, small parts of the body and stuff like that. So I would say I would mature with just taking care of myself and doing things like that. As far as body weight, I think I was about maybe 11 or 10. So cut a lot of yeah, a little bit of different diet. Just hitting the weights a little bit more, and then also just drinking a lot more water because as you lose body weight, you need to hydrate a lot more because muscles are depending on you a lot more. So that's one thing I'm trying to do. So I'm an athlete, so sometimes we take the course of just eating whatever, and I realized that I was feeling sluggish and tired a lot, and just certain things in that area. So I started to eat more salads, more chicken, more light foods, and it started to make a difference in my body. Start to move a lot faster, get looser. I start to drink a lot more water. Start to loosen up a little bit. Um, the past few years I've been playing football. I've been a very tight player. not as elusive. So, that's one thing I want to work on this year is being more elusive, making big, more explosive plays. And, one way to do that is, becoming limber and more stretchier and just flexible. Well, part of that we're gonna see in fall camp, but just from the previous practice and stuff, we're still competitive, and we're working really hard. Our offense is becoming a little bit more explosive day by day. The attention to details and certain stuff, and you watch film from last year. We left a lot of the details out on certain plays and stuff like that. So it may have went in and out one ear last year, but we're very much paying more attention to detail this year. Most definitely, I feel a little bit of pressure, but what pressure comes responsibility, and I've been pretty responsible my whole life. So it's not too much, and then God gives His soldier the hardest battle. So I'm very grateful to be in the position that I'm in. Well, most people would be like, oh, it's so exciting to go to media day. I'm not gonna say that I wasn't excited, but I don't always have the same reaction as everyone else. I'm very low demeanor and you know very to myself. So my mom's calling me. She's like, "Oh my God, you're going to Vegas for media day." I was like, "I already know, Mom. It's not nothing big, but I am grateful here to be representing our team and just here to represent Spartan Nation." To be honest, I would say a little bit of trauma. A little bit of trauma can change you in a good way or a bad way, and for me, I think it's changed me in a great way. It had me slow down. Sometimes you're moving a bit too fast, and you slow down, you get to see the small details, and I would say that's another reason why I really like Coach Smith, because he helped me in that aspect of life to slow down and start to see the small details and stuff. And I started to see the small details in like everyday of life, and now that I've done it in football, I can do it in my everyday life, and it helped. So, dang. Okay, so the motivation behind the fit, I think it goes good with my skin complexion. I'm pretty dark, and brown, orange, any color like that, I think would pop on me. So I went into the store looking around. I seen green, I seen blue, but I'm not wearing blue. And then I seen some gray ones. I was like, well, everybody's gonna be wearing that. So I wanted to be different, wanted to show a little bit of my personality, and be a little bit classy. I feel like I've grown smarter, as far as like reading defenses and just, slowing down the game a bit. Everybody keeps saying they want to move fast and play fast. Well, to move fast and play fast, you need to slow down and actually realize what's going on. I mean, it's a great feeling to have a rivalry like that. The energy, the atmosphere. It's a different part of like college football when you go against a rivalry. And playing there last year, man, it was a great feeling, man. Just making big plays in a atmosphere like that felt great. So I'm looking forward to battling again. A personal life goal is to push others around me to be successful as well. He's became a great vocal leader around the team. He's pushing everybody to be on point. And I feel like last year he was doing some of the same thing, but it's a different demeanor this year. You can tell that he means business. So when I'm listening to him in the meeting rooms and I'm listening to him in the weight room or on the field, I can feel what he's feeling. Not necessarily. I feel like he still had that grace. People looked up to him, expected high expectations, and I feel like he met some of those expectations. But some people expected more, even though it was the first year. I feel like that's the only grace that was needed, just being the first year as a program and as like a team coming together. You got half of Oregon State, half of Michigan State coming together as one. So I feel like as far as any grace, the 1 year grace is over now. So it's a higher expectation for this year. So they came in and made a pretty big impact so far. Like you got Krishan McCray, Omari Kelly, Evan Boyd, Rob Bullard, some of the offensive guys, and then we got some of the offensive linemen coming in, and they just been a great asset. And we realized last year we were missing a few pieces, and now that we finally got those pieces, our confidence as a team and as an offense, as a defense is growing bigger, and as like a coaching staff is growing bigger, and we're looking forward to putting on the season this year. Evan Boyd. I preach on him because we play the same, we play similar, and I feel like some of the things I did last year, he's gonna well exceed that. So I feel like he's gonna be the big elephant in the room that nobody knows about. I mean, we haven't seen too much of our defense yet this year. We still got fall camp coming up to see, who really brings what to the table. But as far as like spring ball and stuff and seeing what they brought to the table then, I think they're playing more as a whole and more as a team. You still got individual positions on the field, but you can see how close they're coming together as a team as far as communicating, rotating, and, just playing as a team. You can see that. Most definitely. It gets me excited to know that I can move around to, slot Z, X. I can move around pretty much anywhere, and then that brings excitement after watching film and watching what some of those positions do. Yeah, some pressure off me. Most definitely, I could be no more grateful for that. But I feel like the additions that we did bring to the room is gonna show. It was definitely Maryland game, the second game. First game. To be honest with you, I was ready during fall camp. Like fall camp, I was making plays. Just standing out of the receiving room. So I had the confidence to go into, FAU ready to play. Unfortunately, didn't get the opportunity to get as much as I wanted to. But, I kept grinding, kept my head down, kept practicing the same way. So when it came to the Maryland game, I just left it all out on the field. Just to help the offense without the ball in my hands. I feel like that's what set a receiver apart as far as his playmaking abilities. How can you make the offense better without you touching the ball? And that's what I'm gonna focus on this year. And then when I do got the ball, I just do what I normally do. I mean, yeah, most definitely. Coming the transition from high school to college, the route running was completely different. It's some routes that I didn't run during high school that I run now in college, but our receivers coach a pretty good detail-oriented coach. So when it came to, running routes, he taught me, certain steps, certain ways to make it easier for somebody my size. So, I think that helped me out a lot. Yeah, box drills, M drills, just, working in small windows and keeping, everything inside the frame because I'm a big guy. So, just working like a little guy. A.J. Brown, bigger body receiver, still can play like anyone else. And I think that's the best part about being a big body receiver. You're not limited to certain things. You may be big, fast, and strong, but I can also move like a slot receiver and be versatile. Just like I said, being a big receiver and being able to do anything that a small receiver can do is not easy. So that's a big accomplishment. The confidence, I think he's going to be a lot more confident this year, a little calmer in the pocket, and then, I think he's going to still make plays with that running ability of his. You can see, like, a big difference from last year and this year. As far as, like, spring ball, you was able to see him be calmer in the pocket. You was able to see him go through his progressions the right way, and, it's a big difference in this game this year. So me, my diet. So it's my diet. Not too much of my diet, but just being looser, more agile and flexible. That's the thing with bigger receivers. We tend to be more stiff. So that's something that I want to work on. Something that I can become better at. So I started to do a lot more yoga, stretching, and just hydrating properly. Right. Yeah. So that, and as far as like maturity, someone asked me that earlier. That's somewhere I had to mature at very fast because I realized how big of a difference maker it was, and once I realized that it was helping me, I just took a better lead on it and jump on it and started to work on it more. Yeah. So necessarily, I might not have to move around as much because we have versatility in the room now. We have Krishan McCray, Omari Kelly, Evan Boyd, Rob Bullard, Alante Brown, and then we also got some young guys in the room too. So, as far as moving around, I'll still be able to move around here and there. But when we got other explosive guys on offense like that, I don't think it's too much to move around. I mean, it's crazy to say, but like in the heat of the moment, he's still calm. He's very preservative, and he keeps that demeanor throughout the whole game, win or losing. But you can see the frustration sometimes on his face. You can see the worrisome, and that he means business at some point. I mean, it gives us the shivers a little bit. When Coach Smith is on that, we lock in even more. He gives us a little confidence boost. We get to the locker room, he gives us a little pregame and then halftime speech, and you could just see that he means business. Not really, not really. I work my tail off, day and night, and just to have the opportunity to touch the field is, one thing I was looking for coming to college, and I had that opportunity, and I made the best of it, and yes, I left a lot on the table, but I did the best I could, and this upcoming season, it's a lot of things I can fix to, make that possibility better. Yeah. So, and it was a good thing. I started to get shaded double a lot, in some games, and I was able to, slow down before pre-snap. I was able to read the safeties, read the linebackers, read the corners' demeanor, and figure out the covers they were running. And then I was able to, run my routes off of that. So, I think that's going to be a big thing for me this year is just being able to read the defense before, the ball snap.